Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me. This is a first time experience for me, so I'm going to see how this goes. I want to thank everybody for joining me. We are in my studio, and here is my artist and also jeweler's bench. So in front of me, I have my bench pin ready to go. I have some sketches and some layouts from a little while ago. I have my saw blades. I have some parts already cut from over 20 years of being a silversmith. I have bags and bags and bags of sterling. So basically, that kind of gives you a lay of the land. I laid these turquoise stones out because I was going to make a bracelet, so I just laid these out. Here's a ring that I'm going to use as part of a band construction. It's a vintage sterling ring, and I sometimes use older parts in my constructions. Here is a pendant that I made years ago. I was also a fiber artist, and it was reminiscent of a dream catcher, but it was sterling silver, and I hand created the sterling silver layers with jump rings and wires and soldered together. And it's rough, but it is what it is. I kept it because I was going to use it for parts because I wasn't thrilled with the end result. Here is another tray of I'll zoom in on that. Here's a tray of stones, and they've been down in my studio for a very long time, and I was working on these tension settings. So I was making these sterling silver jump rings and then soldering them to a post. And then I force fit the stone in it as a sample to see if it would work, and it did. You know, dustier than dusty because it's been here forever. Some of my sterling silver wire. This was a design that I had done for Tanya's ring, and I changed the design as I went. Her center stone was there, and then I changed the design. The end result was slightly different than that, but I laid it out. A repair that's been on here, a big Mexican bracelet. But anyways, I'm going to clean this up a little bit. The only thing that I was going to say is I was trying to show some of the supplies and some of the tools that I use, and ring mandrel on the end here. So I have a tendency to use my old, it's been with me for 25 years, and same ring mandrel, files, nippers, pliers, very small things, a rawhide mallet. These sterling bangles are older, and there's some damage on each one, so I cut these apart to make ring shanks, and I'll show you that process eventually. But again, this is my first of these videos, so I'll pause you there, and I'll get started. I'm going to make a ring, and here is here is the one that is, oh, I got dust all over myself. Here is the ring from years ago. It's a Jabo marble that I slumped, and a sterling bezel. Very simple. I'm not known for this, basically. I'm known for much more complex creations than this, but I'm going to go with a very simple ring today. As simple can be. So there you go. Oh, and here is the stone that I chose. So that is the Jabo marble or glass quote stone that I'm going to set. And I think I'm going to go with my index finger on my left hand. At least that's the way I'm feeling about it. Just a simple bezel, a simple shank, solder it together, kind of show you the process of me in the studio. I'm going to clear this a little bit, and I'll be right back with you. Thank you so much for joining me, and a special shout out to Joan's beading class in Jersey. Joan, thank you so much for your support and for shouting me out to your wonderful beading class. And I hope you ladies and gentlemen are enjoying this video. And here we go. So I'll pause you there, and I'll get started in 1 second. Okay, so you're back with me, and I changed the angle of the camera, and I hope this is okay for now. I'm situated, I'm ready to go. The bench is still really a mess with like pieces and parts and designs from past projects and restorations, so I'm going to scoot all this out of my way. So the basic supplies you're going to need is a saw frame and a saw blade. I already have my saw blade loaded and they're ready to go. I'll show you in future videos how to load your saw blades, and you kind of want to hear a ping. So when you hear that, you know that your saw blade is tense enough to cut. So there's that. And then I feel like such a teacher today. I have other saw blades. I usually use 2/0 blades. So that's my normal saw blade that I use for these. And this is the design that we're going for. So this is the ring. And I'm going to do a more simple construction. So I'm only going to make a bezel. And then I'm also just going to make a simple ring shank and solder it down to just a plain band. And this is the stone, and I'm going to place it on this finger. So there you go. There's that. Now, I'll pause you here and there. I'm not going to tell you each time I'm going to pause you, but I will. I'm going to select the, let's see, I kind of like, yeah, I'm going to go with this one. I'm going to go with this bangle. It's out of round, it's severely dented, and needs to be addressed. So I'm going to find the solder seam really quick. And let's see here. The reason why I try and find the solder seam is just so that I don't, when I heat it, so that I don't burn through the solder seam. So I found it, and I'm just going to gently saw right through that solder seam. And it is going to fight with me a little bit, but that's okay. And my software just fell apart. But again, I've been a little bit rusty. I've been a little bit rusty when it's come to this. Let me pause this and get my software back together. Hold on. Okay, I got my handle back on my software, but you can see this has been with me for 26 or 27 years now. I've been a silversmith that long. All right, we're gonna go back to sawing, and I just kind of hold the bracelet down. And again, I'll go into closer up feeds of this. So I cut through, I'll hang my saw back up. I cut through that. I'm gonna get my ring mandrel. There you go. And I'm gonna go with about a size, I think this finger is about a size 11. So we're just gonna kind of bend this around loosely around the size 11 area, right about there. And we're gonna say that that's close enough right there. So we're just gonna go ahead and we're gonna saw into that, and we're gonna cut it right there. And again, we can adjust the size, and I'm on the corner of my bench pin. I'm supposed to be down here, sawing down here, but you won't really see it, but I'll scoot it down here just so that we understand that the saw frame goes in between this V, and we're a little out of the frame, but I don't want you staring down at my legs in this video. So we'll saw right here. And again, up and down, straight through, and I'll go into more of these videos on how to saw these things. So I just cut it right there, and it's really malformed and doesn't really look like a ring, but I'll place it there, and I'll kind of smash it down a little bit to see if it fits, and it's pretty close. So I'm going to leave it right about there. I might take off a little bit more, but I'm going to go off camera now, and I'll be right back with you when I form this a little bit more. So that's basically what you've got right there. And I love the little etched design in that bracelet. So hold on, be right back. Okay, so I'm back, and you're over to the soldering pad with me now as I try and roll my chair over. Boy, this video is probably a total wreck. I formed the ring a little bit more round, and I double checked the size. And because I've been a silversmith and a jeweler for a long time, I just knew that that was going to work perfect. It's very tight. It's not too tight, and it's not perfectly round. Don't worry about that just yet. It's not a problem. What we do is we line up that seam, and I've taken the liberty off camera to take my file and my flat file and file the two edges flush so that the two edges line up very, very well, and they're very straight. And again, because I'm so versed with the saw blade, you'll get better throughout time. So I push these two edges down a little bit. I just want them to line up. I don't want them at an angle like they are right there. I don't want them like that. So what I want is I want them to be more flush. So I'll do that and kind of smash it down a little bit. And I will make sure that those line up very, very well. And there we go. So just work it a little bit, be patient, but line up that seam and continue to fight with it. There we go. Who knew you would spend 5 minutes watching me line up a soldering seam? So that's very, very close right there. I'll get a little bit closer before I solder it. Now, the things that I'm going to use, and you can still see it's out of round, but that's okay. The things I'm going to use are my tweezers. I'm going to use my soldering pick And I also use Stay Silv Flux. So that's the flux that I use. Now the flux basically keeps the metal clean while you solder. I also have in my studio my solder pallions cut. So these are the solder pallions, and you just cut them into tiny little pieces. I always know what size pallion to use for what size seam I have. Those are a little bit large for this tiny seam, but I'll get into that in future videos as well. And of course, that's a vintage piece of opalescent glass that I'm using for my, I've had that in my studio for decades now. And my soldering torch, I use an oxyacetylene, so it uses the oxygen out of the air. This is make sure I tell you, a number 3 torch tip, so that's very large. So this is the largest torch tip that I personally use in my studio. I've never had the need for a larger torch tip than this. I just haven't. So that one I don't use very frequently. The one I have on my torch right now is let me make sure I tell you correctly. It's a number 1. So the hole isn't that large. It's a number 1. It takes the oxygen from the air that we breathe, and then acetylene passes through this and kind of grabs the oxygen out of these holes and adds that to the flame. So that controls how hot the flame gets. And again, that's a number 1, and that's the one I use the most of. And this, let's see here, I want to tell you, this is Smith Nelson is the brand on my torch. And again, I've had this for decades. It is attached to an acetylene tank, and I think it's a C-size tank. I'm looking at it right now. It's about as tall as my knee. So from the ground to my knee, that's how tall my tank is. It's not very large. And it's probably, I would say that's about 7 inches in diameter. Maybe it's 6 inches in diameter, but it's a very small, small size tank. This one is my double aught torch tip. This is for very fine work, for very, very, very fine work. Hope my camera's still staying with me. Notice on this end where you attach the torch tip to your handle, there are 2 rubber rings that seal that closed, and then this slips down and screws onto the torch itself. So make sure that those are in place every time that you use your torch. Just make sure those are in place to seal that bond between the torch tip and your handle. All right, make sure that those are in place for safety's sake. I always make sure to start up my torch. This is the way I do it. I just turn it on, use my striker, and there we go. We're up and running. Okay, so again, if you listen to the torch, this is a cool torch. Look how that center cone is kind of less aggressive, less blue. And then when you turn this up, let me see here. When you turn this up, listen. That's a very, very, very hot torch, okay? So I'm gonna turn it back down, and we're gonna place it off camera. I do leave my torch running as I solder. That's always the way I have been with my soldering. That's the way I've always been with my studio, and as long as I'm present, I just leave the torch running. So we've lined that up again. I'm a little off camera, and I don't know why we're not focusing, but I'm trying my best here. So we're gonna place that down on our soldering pad. We're gonna get our flux that we have off camera. And again, I'll probably go with a wider angle the next time I do this, but again, this is my first attempt. And thank you so much again for being with me during this process. I really appreciate it very much. Okay, so we've got our flux right on the seam. I don't flux the entire ring. That's just not the way I do it. So there's my solder seam right there. And unfortunately, I'm gonna have to face it towards me, so you're not gonna be able to see this process. I will grab a tiny little piece of solder. And this is with water and flux, so this is watered down. Again, these pallions have been in here for probably maybe 3 years because I haven't been in the studio making something. I did one commission, but all right, so here we go. We're gonna get going. I don't like to waste a lot of time in my life, and here we go. So we're gonna heat up the ring, and we're gonna basically focus on that solder seam. You may not be able to hear me well over the torch, so I'll be quiet for a minute. We'll place the solder there, and then we'll heat up the ring evenly. So you just heat that up very, very evenly. Let it be even, and the solder will start to flow. I wish I could get closer for you, but yep, there goes the solder, and it did. It's float. That's it. So the ring is soldered together. It's extremely hot. You can see that it's glowing red still. We'll quench it. So I put it in water and I quenched it, so now I can touch it. And the solder seam went really well. It's a little bit rough, but what I can do is I can move this down a little bit and I can resolder that off camera. So I will do that. I'll resolder the seam really quick because I was impatient on that. We'll line up the seam a little bit better and then I'll form the ring and I'll come back to the camera in just a second. Hold on one sec. Okay, so I kind of cleaned up my solder seam and I'm gonna basically just kind of tap on this with a rawhide mallet to kind of make the ring more round. Also, just so you know, you can use easy, medium, and hard solder when you're doing your solder seams. I only use medium. Let me scoot this out of the way before I burn my hand. All right, so let's see. All right, there we go. I'm off camera on everything I'm doing, but you get the gist of what I'm doing. I soldered the seam together. I cleaned it up very quickly. I'm not worried about the finish on the metal. I flipped the band over, as you noticed. I just went on both sides. So you want to make sure the band is the same size on both sides of the shank. So it becomes perfectly round. So I'll set my mandrel out of the way, and you can see how round that has become. Sterling is very easy to move once it's annealed. So there's that, and look how dirty my hands are already getting. And you wonder why you go to my other videos and my hands are so dirty. Look how easy that fits. So that's like the perfect size. But again, I'm very used to my hand size. And you will become, as a silversmith, you will become accustomed to what size to make these. Now, this is a little narrow for my liking for such a large glass stone, but it's a thick-walled sterling silver, so it's really going to be sound enough to create that band for the top. All right, so now we're going to go back over to the bench. So that's done for now. And when I was filing, let me show you. I have a half round file, a very old one. All of my tools are vintage and antique because I wasn't able to afford new tools right out of school, and these have become my friends over the years, and I'm used to using them. So where I filed in here, I just kind of filed like this to kind of smooth it out a little bit and get rid of any excess solder. Okay, and when you file, let me show you the correct way. You don't go back and forth like that. You push, you push, you lift up, you push. That's the way to file. You don't do what I was just doing. No. You want to, but it doesn't cut on the way back through. So these files are used to put it down and push. Put it down and push. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on that, but look how beautifully cleaned up that inside seam is now. All lined up on the sides as well. And you can kind of hit the side a little bit because there is a little bit of excess solder, so push. Push. You can hear it taking off a very small amount of metal. Don't do too much, and I kind of go at an angle across the top. Now, the way I do this is I use this top portion right here, I use that to connect to my base plate for my bezel on the stone. So what I do is, I'll do this off camera because I can't do it with, not resting my hands. You should be resting your hands on your bench pin at all times so you're stable, so you have a stable point to work from. When I go over there, I will push across this top edge to flatten this out so then the band can stay down when I'm soldering. See, the band won't stand upright. It'll just want to fall over. So I put a flat spot right on that solder seam. So I will make a flat area that sets on the base plate. You'll see that in just a second. I'm going to pause you now, go over and start to create the bezel for the stone. Okay, so you're back over to the bench with me as I kind of clean myself up. And I want to show you how to create the bezel. Now, also, I wanted to say again, I use medium solder. You may use easy, medium, and hard solders to create your items. So, for example, when you solder this band shut, you should use hard solder. Then your next step should be medium solder, then your next solder should be easy solder so that your other previous solder seams don't reflow. I don't have a problem using medium all the way through because I've been after this for 28 years now. So I'm very familiar with not reflowing my solder seams with all medium solder. So you may progress your way through the process with using different solders, okay? Let me scoot all this other stuff out of the way. My bench is an absolute disaster. To keep track of your solder. So here is, I believe that this is, yes, this is the indicator that this is hard solder. So instead of having, let me explain why. So this is medium solder. And when I get my medium solder, and I use wire solder, and then I cut it into pallions. You may use sheet solder. I don't like sheet solder. It's all preference of the silversmith. This is medium. When it comes in, I curl this, and I put 2 bends in it. 1, 2. So 2 bends. That's medium. This would be hard solder. So let me focus on that. I don't know why we're not focusing here today. Let's see here. There we go. So that's hard solder. I bent it in almost into a box. So that's hard. This is the way I keep track of, instead of just sterling wire, like 24 gauge wire, because on your desk, you're going to get your wire mixed up, and then you're going to try and solder, and you're going to be using silver wire, and it's not going to solder, and you're going to melt your whole piece. Anyways, so medium solder is that way. And then the hard solder is this way. And then easy was just a loop, like just kind of like this, like just a loop, just a loop. That's just an earring wire, but you get the optics of easy was just a loop. So you would keep track of your solder by indicating how to bend it. That's just a helpful hint for the beginning silversmith. Now, I'm so distracted. Oh yeah, a bezel. So the ring shank is done. And again, don't go crazy cleaning that up just yet. Just leave it at that. You've soldered your band shut. It fits perfect. You're good to go. 20 minutes in, I was promising to try and make this a 1-hour video, and I don't think we're going to get there, but I'm going to do my best. So I don't use serrated bezel wire or commercial bezel wire very frequently, but for the sake of this first 101 video, I decided to make it a little bit more easy on all of us. So this is serrated bezel wire, and all I'm doing is I am keeping the stone that I'm going to use, or this glass cabochon. I'm going to keep this stone flat on the desk, and I'm going to form this bezel around it. Okay, I like it right about there. So I don't use very frequently. I don't use a pen or a Sharpie very frequently. I just don't. Let me squeeze this out of the way. I do use a scribe, and let me see where my scribe went. Well, I can't find it for right now. Yeah, here we go. I'll just use the tip of a needle file, and this is a needle file. This is very, very small. It's a German needle file. So what I'm going to do is I wish I could get you closer, but you can kind of see what I'm doing. I'm going to score a little bit beyond. I'm going to keep it very, very tight around that stone. And I'm going to go a little bit so you can see how I wire wrapped that with the bezel. So that's very, very tight. I'll talk about the sizing of bezels eventually, like how high this bezel needs to be. We'll get into that in future videos. But this is just my first time attempt, and I have to tell you, I am very proud of myself because, let me make sure I mark that right. Okay, so I'm just using the needle file to put a little line where I want to cut that bezel. So I clearly marked, well, you can't see it now. Oh boy, here we go. It wouldn't be a Jason video without giggling. There's my little line to indicate where I'm going to cut that bezel. All right. So I'll cut the bezel. I'll come back. I'll show you how to solder that together. We'll solder it to a base plate. Just a simple base plate without these 4 elements that I designed on this one. We'll solder it to a base plate. We'll solder the base plate to the ring. We'll finish it up and we'll be done. All right, wait 1 sec. Before I go over and solder this together, here I go, trying to give you some helpful hints. I will take my, whoops, that's not the right file. Everything is off camera and a million miles away today. I mean, literally a million miles away. Thank you again so much for sticking with this mess of a video. And I'm sure there's other tutorials on YouTube that would be so much better and so much more calm. So I wanted to tell you, I always cut the bezel wire a little past where that line is. So where I scribed, I give myself a little bit of room, and that's just to carefully file that edge down. All right, so I like to make it very, very straight there to keep everything on the up and up. And there's a little tiny barb from one of the sawtooth bezels, so I knock that off as well. A lot of these things I'm just doing because I've I've just done it for so long. So there is the serrated bezel wire. We'll line this up like we did the ring. We'll solder it together. We'll get that seam soldered together. You can see how straight I've made that. Like, let's see here. Hold it straight so you can see. You can see how straight I've made the seam. So we'll line that up. We'll get that soldered together with medium solder. And then we'll solder this down to a plate. And then we'll solder the plate to the shank. And then we'll finish the ring and we'll be done. Hold on, I'll be right back with you. Thank you so much for bearing with this insanity. Okay, another helpful hint. Because my... Hold on, let me start up my torch. Because my... let me see here. Because of my bezel wire being so new, it does have a springiness to it, so it's fighting with me. So I'm going to anneal this. So annealing it, just keep a very soft flame. You can hear it's not very hot. A little too hot, but I'll be quick. So, oops, it's starting to pick up a little bit. Let me turn this down. There we go. We have a very soft flame there. A softer flame. Hold on, let me turn this down. There we go. Softer flame. All right, you can see it's not as loud, and it's soft. So this will gently heat up this metal. I will quench this because the silver here is a little work hardened and a little springy. So we're just making this more malleable to form this together better as I trip over the most simple words today. And I'm gonna settle down because annealing is a little tricky. It's glowing yellow, so it's ready to go. So it's like a yellow and then it's going into red. All right, now it's glowing red. So that is way hot enough. Let's quench it. So I put it in water. Sometimes you can see where it opened up. You can see where that opened up a lot. That's because when quenching it, the shock to the metal. But you don't want that to happen while you're soldering because you'll get very frustrated. So we are annealing a second time. Some people won't do this a second time, but I most certainly will. Look how orange the flame is and how quiet it is. Now it's red hot, ready to go. And we quenched it. So we put it into water, and now I can touch this. So putting this back together now, watch this. Watch how easy. Like, it's almost like magical butter. Look at that. Now it doesn't fight. Now that seam is ready to be soldered. So I'll line that up. I'll get that soldered. But look, the springiness of the silver is gone. It's like, woo, magic. All right, let me solder that together, and I'll be right back. So I just wanted to show you before I solder it, I placed the solder on the inside of the seam once I lined it up, so the solder is right there on the inside of the bezel, not on the outside. So once you set the stone, that will be hidden if there's extra solder there. I do leave my extra solder in place because once I go to solder this to my base plate, I want that to be reinforced. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and solder that together. I'll be right back. And here we are running the solder. On the inside, I decided to record it for you. And there we go. We're soldered. That's all it took. All right. And here my torch heats up on its own. All right. So the solder seam is now done. So you can see on the inside that is soldered closed on the bezel wire. And then we'll quench this so we can touch it. Always remember to quench your metal. I can't tell you how many times I burned my hand touching hot silver because I was in a panic. So there's the bezel. And look how round it is already. Very, very round. There's the solder seam right here that we will clean up. So we'll clean that up on the outside. No problem. There's extra solder there. No big deal. I used a little bit extra, a little bit too much. I got a little too aggressive. What do you know? But you can always clean that up. And you can always make that more perfect. We'll see if the stone kind of fits in pretty well. So by hand, yep, it's going to snap right down in. So the bezel is very, very tight on that. Very, very tight. That's a great size bezel for that stone. So we'll get that cleaned up, and the stone's going to fit in there very, very perfect. Not a lot of gap on the outside because we want it to be very, very perfect and very, very tight. We'll make this slightly more round here in just a few minutes. I'll hammer that, and we'll make it more round, more perfectly round, and we'll get that soldered down to a base plate. Hold on. Now we are back over to our workbench. And I wanted to make sure that you saw that that's very, very tight around there. It's the appropriate height for the bezel as well. You don't want it to go much more than just over the lip of that stone. So that's the perfect height of bezel. Now, if it wasn't, we could easily file and sand the bottom of this down. And where I left my, here we go. It's my constant dirty wet dry sandpaper. So you can see that I've used this for a long time, but it's wet dry sandpaper, and I don't want to look at. Let's see here. Look at the back. That is yeah, I can't tell. I can't tell what grit that is. But maybe it's 500 grit. But wet dry is the most important. So if this bezel didn't fit this stone, we would then take the bezel and we would just wet this, and we would sand the bezel down. So we would go in circles, go in opposite directions, back and forth, across. We would sand this down. So we would sand this bezel to adjust the height of the bezel for the stone. We don't need to do that on this one because it fits in so well. So we don't need to adjust the bezel. But what we do need to do is make sure it's very flat. So make sure that it's very, very, very flat so that the bezel is very flush. And I just kind of tap and make sure that it's very round. And I just use my hand just to make sure, because it's so pliable from me annealing it, you don't really have to hammer it into shape. I think when some artists or some silversmiths hammer that into shape, it becomes a problem. Let me sand down and file down. I see a little bit of a gap on the bottom here. Let's get rid of that and make sure that that sits down a little bit more flush. When you look across the bezel, you'll look across underneath, like on this edge, and you'll see I'm looking down at it at this angle. So you'll see that it's very, very flush onto this metal surface. You don't want to see any light through that bezel. By the solder seam, there's a little bit of light, but it's going to fill in. That's going to settle down and fill in. I'm not going to worry about that as much. But the stone fits down in. And sometimes what I'll do, I don't know where my my burnisher is. Here I go doing a video on not having the right tools for the jobs. I'm going to clean off my bench for the next video, I promise. And again, thanks for bearing with me. I'll just use the end of this dowel. It's another soldering pick, but I'll just kind of go around and don't rock the bezel over. Don't go like this and push the bezel over the stone. Just go from the side and kind of move the stone around and twirl it. Right at the solder seam, I like to focus on that and straighten that out as much as humanly possible. So again, I'm just going parallel with this on here. I'm going parallel to the bezel and kind of making the bezel be more perfectly round. Now that should slip right off, and it does. So it's very, very tight, but the bezel does slip right off of there. So it's not too tight. It's the perfect diameter. And you can optically see that it's very much so, let me hold it up to the camera, it's very much so more round now and fits that very perfectly with very little gap in it whatsoever. You want to take your time with the bezel. Don't push that part of the process. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just keep you on camera. I'm going to scoot this out of the way. So that's there. There's our ring. So we've got our two parts done. Now we're going to go with, and this is a little bit of a way to cheat. I don't do this. This isn't normal for me, but I'm trying to help you out. So what you then do is see where this bezel fits into your template for circles. And look, it's going to fit right into that one. So you're going to have a little bit of extra metal on the outside that you can sand and file down. So let's just leave it there and let's double check and make sure, yeah, there's our stone, there's our bezel, and it fits within that circle. It doesn't hang over at all. Don't have it hang over because your flat sheet is going to be too small then and it's not going to work. So there you go. Now what I'm going to do is I'll lay that out on a sheet of probably 24. No. Why would I say 24 gauge? I'll lay that down on 18 gauge flat sheet. And then I'll be back and I'll show you how I saw that out real quick. And then we'll solder this down, solder the ring together, and then the video will be done. Thank you so much. I'll be right back. I also want to show you my tray that I get my silver out of. So this is 18 gauge flat sheet and a gigantic piece of sterling. That now would run a lot of money, probably $600 or $700. Back in the day, I think I paid $120 maybe. But I bought my silver a long time ago. And then pieces, parts, things that I've cut things out of, old components, silver pallions that I made out of scrap, another piece of 20 gauge silver sheet. 20 gauge is thick enough for most jobs. That would be a great shank system, and that would be a great a great shank system for, sorry, I keep ignoring phone calls. Apparently everyone and their mother is calling me today. It's all work calls, and work can wait. This is my day of fun. Sterling silver chain, sterling silver tubing, more sterling silver sheet. That is, I believe this one, yeah, this one's 18 gauge. And when you buy large quantities, you get a discount. So that I got 20% off because I bought so much of it. But I needed longer pieces for some of my projects. And then just a ton of cutoffs, more pieces, sterling wire. That's only one tray of several that I use. So I just wanted to show you some of my sterling silver sheet, just so you could see that. Okay, so I scribed my circle onto a sheet that I had used a million times, and I'm down to just this tiny little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and saw that out. So I just wanted to show you that I scribed it with a steel tool. And double check before you cut this out. This is a helpful hint. Double check that your bezel does fit within that circle. And it does. It's very, very close. Now, normally what I would do, and this is just the usual, but I'm bending the rules here because I'm trying to educate you on how to correctly do this. Normally, I would just solder this down to a flat sheet. I would just solder it there. But all this excess will pull the heat away from this bezel and make it very difficult to solder. But again, I'm versed at a challenge in the studio, but I want to make this easy for all of you. So you can see that that bezel lays down very, very flat onto that metal. You can see that that sits down, very, very flat to that. And there's not a lot of gap in between the bezel and that flat sheet. Again, the flat sheet's not perfectly flat. It's not perfectly flat. That's been floating around on the desk for a long time. So I'll hammer that down a little bit. So I'll just get my rawhide mallet. Again, you can use your rubber mallet, but I like my rawhide mallet. It doesn't leave any sort of marks on the metal. So kind of hammer that down flat. And again, flip, hammer, and again, that kind of flattens that out, and then your bezel's going to fit on there, even tighter, so the bezel fits on there even more flush. Okay, so I'm going to saw that out. I don't really need to keep you on camera, but I guess I will for a second. Now, saw blades break very frequently, so I just wanted to show you kind of, well, I'm off camera. Let me see if I can angle you up just a tiny little bit. There we go, without showing you too much of the disgustingness of the background here with what I'm working with today. So just saw into this. Keep your saw blade like level, up and down, and use the full saw blade. A lot of people just like to go like this, like, you know, up, down. No. Get the full swing. Listen. Get the full swing of that whole saw blade. Don't do this. Don't do that. Go like this. Easy. You can use beeswax to lubricate the saw blade, but I have a tendency just to let it cut its way right through. All right, I'm going to wait. I'm going to pause you there. It's going to take too long. I'm going to pause you there. But you can see that I've really already started to go right outside my line. Right outside the line. Wait 1 second. Color outside the lines. All right, so you've made it back with me, and I'm just getting the circle finished up after I sawed it out of the flat sheet, sawed it out of this, and all I'm doing is going around and basically making sure that it's almost perfectly circular. So I'm seeing a little bit of variance there. And then I go across that edge to get rid of that kind of burr of metal because there's definitely a little bit of a tooth left. So I kind of angle it across both sides. So let me do that really quick. And thank you again so much for joining this insanity. The next time I do one of these, I'm hopeful that I will have a professional studio come in and video this so that I'm not doing both the filing, sanding, and constructing. So there it is. Very, very circular. Little out of round on the one side, but very circular. Sterling silver, and that is 20 gauge. metal. So that's more than thick enough to create that base plate. Let's make sure the bezel still fits there. Let me move my saw out of the way again. Here we go with the saw in my face. All right, so put that flat, and look at that. Boom! Totally perfect. Boom, boom, boom. Absolutely awesome. Love it. So that fits within that. And there's a little bit of metal on the outside, so I can't really pick it up and show you, but we're going to go over and get that soldered down, and then we'll get the shank soldered down to that. We'll finish it up, and we've got our ring. So, of course, I didn't like the way the bezel was fitting onto that flat sheet, so I decided to wet the wet-dry sandpaper, keep my hands down on the bezel, keep my hand completely down on it, and really, really, really sand that down flush. I just didn't like that there was not a large gap, but there was a gap enough that it bothered me. So I'm going to sand that down a little bit, and I just wanted to show you that process. Okay, so I double checked it, and I'm much more satisfied with the way the bezel is down on that flat sheet, so I will take it off. And let's see here. Let me make sure I put on enough flux. And again, my flux kind of dried out because I hadn't been using it for so long. And look at this paintbrush. For those of you who say I'm not real, that's proof that I've been metalsmithing for a long time. Look at the look at the way I burnt the bristles off of it, and look how I've actually hit it with the torch and I've completely bent it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come up with a membership level to buy me a new paintbrush. Oh, I'm nuts. And again, thanks for bearing with me and my terrible humor. But I think there was only one YouTuber once that said I wasn't who I was. And look at me now. Okay, enough of that. No negativity here. All right, so especially in this magical place I call a studio, I'm not going to do it, even though I want to. For those of you who said I'm not who I am, ta-da! I am who I am. All right, so which is nuts. And an artist and an animal advocate. Let's see here. Let's pour this in here and make sure that our flux is not going to dry out on us. Boy, that flux has been with me for a long time too. All right, so I'll get the solder pallions kind of lined up on the inside of this. Now just remember that as your flux starts to burn off, these solder pallions will kind of jump around. So I'm lining them up on the inside again because I don't want to line them up on the outside. I'm going to have to cut some more. Definitely. I'm going to have to cut some larger ones. But this will get me a really good start anyway. So there you go. Line these up on the inside. Take your time. Line them up. And I always put them a little bit inside of where I'm going to solder because they do jump around. And then I take the solder pick as we get closer to soldering, and I will move them into position. So let's see, we'll get them relatively close. We'll let that dry out for a couple minutes so that the water kind of evaporates a little bit. They'll still jump around once I heat this up, but let me keep the bezel in the center of that piece of silver too. And that's why you have, sorry about the spinning this, but it's a must. For those of you who have vertigo, I'm very, very sorry that you're sensitive to that. I will try my best not to spin it as fast. Be mindful of all my viewers and their sensitivities, because that is part of my job. All right, so there, we lined up some solder pallions on the inside. We'll let that dry out for a couple minutes. I am going to cut a couple more, fill this up. I'll pause you now and I'll be right back. So I cut a whole bunch more solder pallions. So I have those ready to go for the next round in my watered down flux. And here we go. I'm going to start at the torch. We'll gently heat this up because it's not really, I'm impatient when I do these things. So I'm going to heat this up without really waiting. And you know, I'm going to have to add some solder, I think. So let me be quiet and you'll see these solder pallions kind of jump around a little bit. So we're drying out the flux now. Kind of just giving it a general heat, not too hot. You don't want to go too hot because you will melt the bezel wire. Let me move my paintbrush out of the way so I don't burn that again for the 80th time. And this is way too hot. There we go. That was way too hot. I adjusted it down. We'll just give it a general overall. Let me grab my soldering pick and make sure that these little guys and ladies don't jump around too much. And now I'm backing the solder pallions up against the inside of that bezel wire. Now remember, the bezel wire is so much thinner and so much of a finer gauge. Let me make sure that these are, you know, the flux is getting awfully dirty on me. So it'll be okay. We'll just heat it up very gradually. Make sure your bezel, here I go spinning it again like a crazy person. I'm very sorry about that, but we have to spin, spin, spin to make sure we heat this appropriately. Let me heat it up. I am gonna stay in the very center of that. And my bezel is getting awfully, awfully hot. And way too hot, I can already tell. I'm gonna step this up off of the block. So give me a minute and I'll be right back because I have to step up that piece to get underneath and heat it up from underneath. Wait 1 second. Okay, so I took 3 tiny heat rocks and I put a little tripod underneath this. So there's 3 little rocks. Let me see if I can pick that up for you. There's 3 little rocks underneath that silver now. There's 3 little heat rocks. So now the countersink of this soldering pad, see how that heats up and steals the heat from something? That will steal the heat from your item, and that's exactly what was happening. So now this is up off the countersink and it's only on 3 parts. Let me heat this up evenly. Let me let the solder flow. Let me get underneath. I'm gonna heat from underneath where those solder rocks are. And solder is starting to flow. And we're having a good bond. Things are going well. Solder is flowing. Let me go on this side. Solder is flowing all the way around. We're nice and hot. We've heated it up evenly. The solder is completely flowed. I see one little gap in the solder. So I am going to, normally I would tell you pause it and don't do this, but I'm going to add one right now. I'm going to scoot that over into the little gap area that we have. And while we're nice and hot, I'm going to fill in that gap right now. Because I don't ever want to have a gap in my solder. So again, heat up the piece evenly. Remember, heat, heat, heat evenly, 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 and then go in for the kill. And there goes the solder. And even though it's dirty, it's flowed. So now we have a solid seam all the way around. And you can see that silver line all the way around. Look how red hot the silver is getting. Almost too hot at that point. So back off. That's enough. Shut your torch off. I don't know why I'm screaming still. Shut your torch off. And there we go. So this was my little tripod, 3 stones that so graciously got me that glorious, and I'm not going to touch this, it's red hot, that glorious solder seam. I'm going to let it air cool a little bit. I will quench it after it air cools, but you can see where the solder pellets were. My previous solder seam did not flow. It just got dirty because I didn't hit it with the torch. And I didn't focus on it, so there you go. And that blue color is just the flux that has kind of crystallized after it's cooled a little bit. So there we go. I'll quench that, I'll get that cleaned up, and I'll be right back. Okay, so here's where we're at. That is right after I quenched it. You can see where I put the pallions, and you can see where, oh, dog fur. You could see where the pallions were and where they ran up onto the bezel. That is because I got the bezel so hot in that first attempt that it started to flow up onto the bezel. But look at that solder seam on the bottom. Glorious, not a single gap whatsoever. And because those solder areas on the inside, they're just discolored because of the flux. But look at the outside. That's what we're concerned about, what people see. Now, normally I wouldn't use that much solder, so I did get a little carried away with my silver solder. I'm going to go get that cleaned up in the pickle pot, which is my way of cleaning the metal. I'm not going to take you over there because that means it would waste another 3 minutes of the video. But I'm going to get it in the pickle solution. We're going to get that cleaned up. And then look at the flux all over my hands. We're going to get that cleaned up. And then we're going to check the stone. We're going to get the outside edge sawn down and cleaned up off camera. So I'll get that extra metal off of there. And again, that's the reason why I don't lay these out, is because you do get extra metal on the outside. This did shift a little bit, so I've got more on one side, less on the other, but I don't care about that because I'm removing that. We're not going to do anything fancy on this video. We're going to make it very, very simple. So there you go. There's your solder seam. I'll be right back once we clean it up. Okay, so fresh out of the pickle pot, look how clean. Didn't polish it, didn't sand it, didn't do anything. That's right out of the pickle pot. I'm going to get this outside edge cleaned up. I'm going to sand down the solder excess on the inside a little bit. Not too much. I don't want to change what this is becoming, but you can see the thickness of my metal. Don't be bashful when you're using silver. Go for it because you want things to last and not break. Hold on, I'll be right back, and thank you again. We're almost done. As I was filing, I was thinking, I don't know why I'm leaving you out. I guess I could chat with you for a couple of minutes while I completely finish this this work up over here, I want to thank you again so much. I've only had a very few people in my studio with me ever. And this has been an amazing experience for me because there is a certain level of magic that happens when I'm working. And it's my quiet time. It's my time away from life and living and work and phone calls and emails. And sometimes negativity, bad news, drama, certain things that aren't necessarily happy. So this is my safe space, and this always has been my safe space. And it's strange, I've only shared it with, let's see here, my mom. The students that I went to school with, of course, we were, experiencing this together. Beautiful, magical times with, at first strangers that became like a spiritual family. And I just want to say thank you for being here. Jeremy has also been in the studio with me on 2 occasions. We made some gifts for family members and for a close friend of his. And so Jeremy has been in the studio with me too, and he was just amazed. And again, I want to thank you so much for the love that you have shown Jeremy, because he really does. He deserves to be showered with love. He's quite an amazing person who has a heart of gold and has been with me now. I think we're going on 9 years, and I never remember our anniversary. I barely remember my birthday anymore each year. So it's an amazing thing that he's been able to be in the studio with me on a couple occasions. So he has seen this magic happen. And again, I'm sorry. I apologize for the haphazardness of the video and pausing and coming back and some of the spinning of the soldering thing. I know that that's got to be tough for some people to watch. But anyways, I'm getting this cleaned up. We're at about 50 minutes on the video. I wanted to keep it about an hour, and of course, I'm supposed to keep my videos around 20 to 30 minutes for the most success in terms of viewership. But I always break the rules somehow, some way. Let me clean out my file. I hadn't done that in a long time. So let's go across the grain and clean out this file. And this is just the appropriate brush to use. It's like a very tough steel tooth brush, and this kind of gets into your file and cleans out all of that excess silver and metal that's been trapped in your cutting teeth on your file. And this one is German. And it's, I think, and I'm not trying to be funny here, because I'm not trying to be funny. I think it's called a bastard file. And I always loved saying that in school, because then that way, of course we could get away with swearing. I don't know. I was so immature. I mean, I still am. Sometimes. All right. So we're cleaning this up, and I'm using my big bastard. Here I go. Oh God. And, the right tool for the job. This is a bit extreme for this size of a thing, but I had a lot of cleanup to do on the outside of this. So normally I use, here, I'll show you the normal. Where did the normal one go? Well, I mean, you can see the difference, so this is basically, jewelry related. And then this is more, I don't want to say woodworking, because it's not. This is definitely a metal file. But just make sure you get the right files for the job. And then, I'm so intricate sometimes. Here's my needle files. I use these little needle files. And I think I have about 70 of them now. And you can see, I mean, they've been in this studio for a long time. Be careful where you store your tools, because they will quickly rust if you do not store them correctly. Take care of your tools, because that is what makes you successful, and that's what keeps you with great craft. So just remember that. All right, so I'm going to finish this up off camera, but you can see how I've got this really finished down, and I'm getting into that edge, and you can see all the silver on my hands. I do have a tray underneath me that's catching most of my dust, but again, you can kind of see the craft that I'm doing, and then you can see where some of the metal is starting to curl up. That is because that's that burr that I speak of. hit that at an angle and you'll clean that up. I'll clean up the rest of this. We'll get ready to solder the shank down. We'll set the stone and we'll be on to the rest of our day. Okay, so I've taken the liberty to now completely file that down with smaller files, and now I'm just kind of finishing this with sandpaper. I think, again, I don't remember. I think that, look how long it's been around. And I'm not using water on this, and I could. You don't have to. Sometimes it makes it easier when you're removing a lot of metal. But listen how you can tell that sandpaper is almost done. You can just tell by sound, and you will get that good, and you will know that when the sandpaper is done doing its job, you can tell. I'm just kind of finishing that up, and you can see it's not perfect. You know, it's not perfect there's a little seam there, but it's getting there. It's getting to perfection. And, or I should say, not perfection. I hate that word. I don't hate that word. I don't hate anything. But I dislike that word. I don't like the word perfect, because nothing's perfect. Nothing. Let's see here. We'll clean up that one a little bit more. All right. So you can tell that we're pretty much there. Now, stay away from pushing on the bezel. Don't push on this. Let's make sure our stone still would fit down in there. Now, don't let the stone go down in. Don't push it down in because there's no way to get it back out. Now, in school, we were taught to drill a hole from the back so that if you got this stuck, you could just push a little a probe or your soldering pick into there and pop that stone out. You can tell that is going to snap right down in that bezel. You can tell it's going to go right down in. It's going to snap down in. Let's not do it. Let's wait. So also position of the stone. I'll talk about that when I go to set it. So now we're going to solder. We can clean this back up quite a bit. We can sand that down now. So let's sand down the back real quick. I'm going to dip this into some water, and let's make sure that this is nice and finished up. Again, sorry for the circular motions. If that bothers you, just fast forward a little bit. I'll try and be a little bit more calm with it. A little bit more sensitive to my amazing viewers, because you are all now such amazing friends of mine. And I'm so glad that I have you here. I just feel like amazing because I said magic, and you have all supplied me with such magic and such love. And I still get teary-eyed quite frequently, but it's happy tears to feel accepted and loved. So I kind of sanded that down to give it a nice base that we could polish that. I don't like polishing my silver very much, but I like that finish. I like that kind of, I'm not scratchy, but matte finish, almost kind of an industrial steel, if you will. And normally I design the back of these, and you'll see in my other video. So if you've enjoyed this, please go over to, I think the title of the video is Insane Silversmith Unboxing. I think that's the title of the video, but it's all of my rings that I've constructed. Well, not all of my rings, but a lot of my rings that I've constructed. And you'll see that a lot of times I do take great care with the back of things. And other times, like today, I just wanted a simple stone setting. I could do a whole bunch of engraving and designs or application of other things, like I can solder down little discs or coins or things on my desk that are decorative. Sometimes I'll solder down secondary stone mountings for the wearer, so only the wearer can see that. But anyways, you can see that I'm finishing this up now, and I'll go solder the shank down. We will then refinish all of this. I'll pickle it one more time to clean it up, and then we are on our way to have a fantastic day. I'll clean up the inside a little bit more too. I'm not liking that. So, all right, there you go. And again, when you're soldering, use less is more, but just make sure you have very strong seams and you don't have gaps in your silver solder seams, because that's a problem. So there you go. That's just the way I create a simple bezel. And again, the stone would definitely fit right down in there. So we've got a great bezel, and the stone will snap down in, and we won't need any sort of epoxy to hold that in, and I will prove that when I go to set the stone. I'll pause you right there. I'll be right back. Okay, so we're in the home stretch. So now I have this all cleaned up. I have the ring ready to go. I did take liberty to file and sand the flat spot that I talked about on the top of this ring shank. So now look how flush that sits. So now that sits down very, very flush to this. What I do need to do is I do need to, I'll show you real quick. So I flattened out an area on there on that shank. See how I sanded that down and filed that down? So now there's a flat area. That will give a very strong bond to this. Now, I'm not going to flux everything. So the only place I'm going to flux on this is where I want the solder to flow. Now that's an awful lot of watered down flux, so I'm gonna have to burn some of that off. I'll put it right back where it was. I might solder this off camera, but I also might try to solder it on camera. Now, I can borrow, technically, in quotes, borrow some solder from that seam, because remember, I flattened that area where that seam is on the inside of that shank. I'm going to heat that up real quick. Give me 1 minute to burn some of that flux off. Give me 1 second here as I start this up with my striker. Let me burn some of the flux off real quick. And thank you again so much for joining me. And I'm so glad that you're here with me. And again, this is the first of many silversmithing videos. And customarily, I don't do things quite so simple in design. Let me turn that down a little bit. I have a dog fur in my mouth. Let's see here. Let me make sure that's relatively centered. It is. It's relatively centered. Now, I can move that once I start to solder this together, and normally I would do this off camera because these solder seams are pretty tricky. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 more of my tiny little solder pallions, these tiny little guys that I cut earlier, very, very small, and I'm going to put them, so careful, on the sides of this. Now remember, that is very hot from me just heating it up. So I'm going to put 2 solder pallions on either side of where that shank, the ring shank, hits that back plate. So there we go. Now they are stuck down because the heat of the metal kind of grabs it like glue or adhesive in a way. And I wish I could take this closer to you, but that is as close as we're going to get today, because on the reverse record mode, that's the closest we are going to get. All right, so we have the 2 solder pieces there. Now I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to roll back. I'm going to be quiet here for a second. And I don't want to overheat this because I don't want to melt the bezel. And, whoops. I don't want to overheat the bezel. Nope, we're too hot again. Darn it. Okay, let's try that. Just give me a couple quiet seconds here. Heat this up very evenly. See how the color starts to change on everything? Heat the band up, heat the base plate up. Make sure you're heating both at the same time. So one's not hotter than the other. Now the solder flowed onto the ring. So now I had to hit there we go. I hit the base plate. Now let me add 1 more piece of solder. So one side did go, and the other side did not, because the solder jumped onto the band because I had the band too hot. Now let me heat the whole thing up again. And there's that little solder piece on that side right there. I'm going to heat that up. And there we go. It went right underneath the band. So now that's right in the center. If I need to move it at all, you can heat it up and scoot this, but I'm going to leave it right there. I'm not going to move that shank anywhere. It's in the center of the ring, and it's also, let me pick this up. It's in the center of the ring, and it's centered. It's in the center there, and it's also centered that way. So before I burn my hand, let me turn that off. 3 things at once. It's, there you go. So you can see that very strong solder seam and very, very hot metal. I don't really want to quench that right now, so I'll just set that off to the side over here, out of the way of where that's very, very hot right there. But you can see that that went really beautifully. It's centered there. It's centered that way. It's also centered this way. And again, that flattened area, see how that solder eutectic really grabbed that base plate? You can see that right there. And you can see that that went really well. It didn't melt the bezel at all. So we were successful there. Again, all medium solder. So if you wanted to, again, you could use hard solder for your first seam, which would be either both you could use hard solder on soldering the shank together, when you made the ring. You can use hard solder there. You can also use hard solder on the bezel. I don't recommend that because you can melt your bezel wire if you do that. So, but there you go. There it is, soldered together. I'll get that cleaned up in the pickle pot, and I'll do a quick cleanup around it. We will pop that stone in, and you will see this on my hand and the finished product. Thank you so much. Again, you have been a blessing to me. Thank you for encouraging this video, and there's so many more to come. So if you have any questions, don't get too anxious or nervous about what is this, what is that. Don't worry. Just enjoy this first video, and I will be back with you in future videos and much more complex stone settings, pave setting, prong setting, bracelets, pin mechanisms, how you solder those together. Really difficult stone settings is what I'm known for. So that's just the most simple bezel we could make, just to get that J-bow on your hand. And again, as I fidget with this, let me clean that up, and I'll be right back with you. Thank you again so much. And here's what I refer to as the pickle pot. So this basically has the pickle solution in it, and it's really, really hot. So there's the ring down in there getting cleaned. So just so you know, when I refer to pickle pot, that's exactly what that is. It has pickle solution in it to clean the sterling and to clean the metal. Again, here are the pickle tongs. You always want to use copper. Why can I not get that in the frame? You always want to use copper tongs with your pickle pot, because otherwise then you'll start to steel plate everything that you put in there. If you use steel, it'll start copper plating things. All right, let me pause that real quick. Thank you for the odd angle. I'll be right back. Okay, so here we are back at the bench with this nice cleaned up, freshly pickled and rinsed off. You got to rinse it off with water. My hands are still wet, but look at how that's going to fit. It's going to be the perfect fit. It's going to be ideal. It's fantastic. It's tight enough, not too tight. Goes on, stays on. Totally centered. Got to clean up that solder seam from the bezel. That's still quite a mess. But look at the inside, how beautiful. So pickle, when you get silver hot enough and pickle, you clean the item, you will see the fine silver rays to the surface. So that's why that's so white. Everything on that is so white. But you can see the solder seam there. Very strong solder seam. Slightly miscolored. And there's a tiny little gap right there in the solder seam, but that's to be expected. I will get that cleaned up. I will file this down. I will steel wool that. I will sand that down. But look at the bezel. And then I'm going to figure out what position I want this stone. Did I want it to be like that? Did I want it to be like that? I'm going to... Oh, I like... That's it for me right there. I just decided. So I'm going to put it in like this. So it reads across the finger. So that kind of dramatic zigzag goes right across my hand, right across my finger. I thought I was going to go more lightning bolt like that. And maybe I will. Maybe I like the proximity of that better. We'll see, and we'll decide on that in just a second. But again, that'll snap down in, and then I'll show you how to rock the bezel over with a burnisher. We'll get that all finished up. I do not highly polish my items, so I don't think you'll ever see a video of me doing a polish on anything. But I really loved the idea of using that vintage bangle with that zigzag, chevron style zigzag design, up and down undulation to get a finish on the band. All right, I'm going to pause it there. We're going to get this cleaned up. I'm going to bezel set the stone right in front of you right here, and then I'll slip it on my hand, and I'm going to wear that today all day. So within an hour, look at what you can do. You can make absolute magic. I do like that, though. Yeah, all right, so give me a sec. Okay, so I'm back and we're in the final stretch. So I got the ring all cleaned up and all ready to go. Steel wooled. I used a little bit of pumice, which is a ground up, I believe it's a ground up volcanic rock. At least I think that's from my memory. But solder seams all cleaned up, inside all cleaned up, ready to go. Fits perfect, bezels round, ready to be set. I think the proximity of the stone, I think I'm going to go this direction because then it reads great that direction. If I go that direction across the hand like I wanted to, then it doesn't read really well that way if I wear it upside down or towards the viewer. So I think what I'm going to do is, so the ring shank will be east to west. I think I'm going to put this in then like north to south. Now there is no epoxy or no resin or no adhesive. Let me clean the back of this off. Let me make sure that that's totally cleaned off because there's a giant fingerprint. But then again, maybe I should leave that. So maybe when, historians find it in 300 years, they can find my fingerprint on the back. We've got that all cleaned up. We've got that done. And then this basically, so that's, no epoxy. And then this will just sit down in. Now I want to make sure that I get it. Let me grab my ring clamp. I think, yeah, here it is. So here's my ring clamp. Let me hold on to this. Actually, I'll do it on this side. Yeah, there we go. I'll put it in my ring clamp and then put my little wedge inside my ring clamp. There we go. So to hold that, tap it down a little bit. Let's do this the right way. All right, there, close. Okay. All right, so let's see here. I want to make sure, let me stand up and let me get the right north to south proximity. Okay, there we go. So I've got the right where I want it to be, and I'm going to push down in. So now you can see how tight I made that bezel. And I guess I should leave it in my ring clamp for right now. You can see how tight I made my bezel. So there's a little bit of cleanup that I'll need to do right here. But you can see that now that is going to read beautifully north to south and then the east to west. So you can see that that's going to read just stunning right where it's at. Now, if I didn't like that, I may be able, yeah, you can swivel it a little bit, but you can see how tight I made my bezel. That really doesn't want to move in there at all. That's now stuck down in. Now, to get that out, I would just have to hit really hard on the side to get that out of there, but let's make sure that you see it straight on. So that's the way it's going to read on the finger, and I love it. I love it right where it's at. So again, the universe and the control from beyond, my muses that watch me work. Let me tap this down in. And then we'll take our burnisher, which is this tool. It's a burnisher, and it's curved, and it is slightly curved on that end. The way I do this is, it's almost like, peeling an apple or peeling an onion. But what I do is I start with the obverse side. This is the way I do it because it fits better in my hand. And then I carefully just start to bend that bezel over. So you can see that, okay, see how I dented that in to hold? So what I do is then I push in here, I go right across from it, I push in here. Now that kind of secures the stone. So I went north, south, and then you'll go east, rock it over, and then west, rock it over. Okay, so see how I've crimped those in? Now that stone is definitely not going anywhere. So now what you continue to do is I'll continue to rock these over in proximity to one another, and then I'll come back as soon as I get all those kind of crimped over. I'll come back and I'll show you how to rock the bezel completely over and then burnish it with your burnisher. Okay, so there you go. Wait 1 second. So there is a little bit more of the bezel being rocked over. It looks like a crimped pie. And, you might be alarmed and say, oh, that's unsightly. No. Just relax, because then what we do is we start to go across those areas that are peaks. So start to push up and over, 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 over and over and over. And so carefully and slowly start to push that bezel right over the edge of that stone. And once again, you can see this was the perfect size bezel for the stone. And again, not perfect, but very well measured and very well thought out when I was first cutting that bezel. So take your time on the bezel to make sure it fits well. That's one of the keys to doing this. And just keep pushing the metal over, 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 over. Kind of like, keep your thumb here. And again, I should be resting my hand down here, and I should be doing this. This is the motion. This is what you do. This is how you get that bezel to rock over in place. Now go a little bit lower and start to grab some of that basic bezel and really start to rock it over and push. And I just keep going in the same direction. You can reverse direction if you wish, but at this point, that bezel is so tight and becoming so sound. So you'll start to see that that's going to close in so perfectly on that J-bow glass. You're going to see that you'll start to see that it'll start to polish itself. And you'll see that it is starting to burnish and polish. But again, to get rid of any of those little problems or little crimps, just keep going over it. And again, when you initially set this stone, why it's staying so centered, why it's staying so central, is because you were smart enough to push north, south, east, west, north, south, east, west, so that the stone didn't have a chance to shift in that bezel. Okay, so you can see it's starting to really get bezel set down in there. Again, you don't need epoxy to reinforce that. On some of my softer stones, I will say there was a joke in school as I finished this. There was a joke in school that we would call it Swiss master set. Like the Swiss that were like masters at stone setting. We would say in school, did you Swiss master set that? And it meant that we reinforced the back of it with epoxy. Some of us would reinforce some of our stones. If in the softer stones, we would reinforce those with epoxy. And then we would call it Swiss master setting. We were so sarcastic in school. I think I started that actually. No wonder why my teachers literally felt me being the most challenging student they had ever encountered. But I've covered that before. Now I'm going to go down on the bezel and I'm going to burnish the bezel on the sides. So I'm going to go down a little bit lower. We're going to burnish, burnish, burnish. So we're just going to rub this, and I flipped it the opposite way. We're going to rub this until we get a very kind of high polished surface. And that's just the burnishing action of the steel tool on the silver. And I'll bring you up again and we'll see. So let's make sure. So you can see, look how I'm starting to then burnish that bezel. So it's becoming polished. But look at how close that sawtooth bezel. Grab that stone and it's not going anywhere. And it's very centered. It looks crooked because it's crooked in the, here, let me take it out of this ring holder. Let's see here, ring clamp. So look how centered. Look how I gotta sand that bezel seam down. Look how centered that stone is now. That glass stone is very, very tightly set. And again, watch this. Look at the proximity on the hand. Boom! Look how exciting. And I gotta clean that up. So I'll do some further cleanup. And I'll take a picture of it. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I'll get this all cleaned up. I'll continue to steel wool it and get a nice finish on it. I'll take a picture of it and I'll post it in the thumbnail of the video. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I really appreciate you very, very much. You have no idea. And look, it works over here too. What do you know? So I appreciate you very, very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here with me today. I will get my bench a little bit more orderly for those that don't like clutter and dust and but I've been doing this for a very long time now. Graduated from metals in 1997 and started producing immediately right after that. So this has been, a lifelong process for me. And I guess I've been doing it for 27 years, actually longer than that, 28 years, I guess. So time flies and I'm not a numbers person. So, but there you go. There is a simple ring setting, soldering 101, bezel 101, ring shank 101, all in the same video. And thank you so much again. I really appreciate your love. I'm going to do some future videos on much more complex items. So thank you so much. And you know how I end every single one of my videos. I absolutely positively love you so much. Thank you. And have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.